Welcome to the Sizzle Basketball Podcast. Today I'm going to be discussing the Los Angeles Lakers. I'm going to be talking about what happened with the series against the Suns. They lost 4-2. And I'm going to be talking about their free agency. They'll be coming up in 2021 and what guys they can try to go for, what trades they can make, and what guys on their team will be free agents. So let's get it going. So first of all, for the Lakers, obviously, they lost 4-2. Injuries plagued their season. COVID plagued their season. And there's a lot of things that have been, discussed in the last 2 days since the Lakers got eliminated two nights ago. There's a lot of things that have been discussed. There's a lot of things that have been talked about already from Lakers fans and moves they would want to see this team make. Right? This team has a couple of free agents upcoming on this team. They have a couple of trade targets that they want to look at. So let's look at those trade targets and those upcoming free agents for the Los Angeles Lakers. So for free agents for the Lakers, I'm going to start it like this. I'm going to name the guys that will be free agents. And then I'm also going to talk about where I think they could go and what kind of contracts they could get where they go. So you have Dennis Schroeder. He's a free agent. He'll be a free agent in this upcoming offseason. I think the Lakers will try to get him back. I know a lot of Lakers fans have not been happy with the way he played against Phoenix. But you have to understand, Dennis Schroeder, in my opinion, he's one of my favorite players because of the way he just gives it his all every single game. And I think the Lakers need that. They need a guy like that. He can score the ball well, right? He's not the most efficient at times, but overall he scores the ball pretty well, in my opinion. And he's a very good defender, right? He's very quick. He's got a lot of speed. He's very aggressive defensively. He's one of the only guys on their team that will press full court on every play, him and Caruso. And he's just got a feisty attitude about him. I really like watching Schroeder play, and I think this is a guy who the Lakers should try to keep, in my opinion. He's one of the younger guys on this team. He's 27. Right, and this team has a decent amount of younger guys, but they also have a lot of veterans. But he's 27, so he still has, he's still relatively young, so he's still going to be very good for a couple, for a while, 5-6 more years. And he's a guy I think they should give a 4 or 5 year extension. Maybe give him like 15-18 million a year. He wanted 20 million a year at one point. I wanted around 20 million a year. I think that's a little high. I would give him 15 to 18, probably closer to the 15 range, but nowhere below that. Because he's worth at least 15. I mean, he's a solid player. He's not a great playmaker. That's his issue. But he's a very good scorer, and he is a very solid defender. He can score from all three areas of the floor, driving, mid-range, and then three-pointer. He can score from all three areas of the floor. So, no, I'm a Dennis Schroeder fan. I like his game a lot. I just think it was tough for him to adjust to the Lakers this year because he was in the bubble with OKC. They got bumped in the first round, but still, he only had like a 3-month off season or 4-month off season, and then he has to go to a new team, right, and adjust to a new team in a shortened season, and then adjust to a new team where there's a bunch of injuries when the playoffs come. So not an easy thing for him to do, and I think that Lakers should re-sign him, give him $15 million a year, and just see where it goes from there. Because I don't think they can go wrong if they do that. He's not gonna really provide any negative for this team, in my opinion. Yeah, maybe bring him off the bench as a sixth man, and try to maybe insert Taylor Horton-Tucker in the starting lineup. Whether you put him at point guard or shooting guard, maybe you move LeBron back to point guard like they did 2 years ago when they won the championship, or last year. Sorry. So we'll see what they do. It'll be really interesting to keep up with and see. But I want to see them re-sign Dennis because I think he deserves to be re-signed. He gave his all this season. He played pretty well during the regular season. It was just during the postseason where he didn't play that well. But there are a lot of injuries and a lot of different factors going on in that postseason, so you really can't blame it on him, in my opinion. Another free agent this upcoming offseason, you have Wesley Matthews. He's making $3 million a year next year. I think this is another guy that this team should look to re-sign, in my opinion. He's a guy who is an energy guy. He's not a great starting player to the point where he can give you a 15-20 a night. He can't do that anymore like he used to. But he plays very good defense, and he only will take 2 or 3 threes a night, but he'll make almost every single one. He'll go 2 of 3 on threes most nights. Maybe get to the free throw line once a night and play good defense. He's the guy that can bring in energy off the bench for this team, and he can bring in a little bit of grit, and that's what this team kind of needs, in my opinion. A lot of people thought this team was soft after they lost to Phoenix and the way they played and the injuries they had. People thought they were kind of soft. So you bring in a guy like Wesley Matthews, you bring him back in, he can help with that kind of thing. He's a good locker room guy as well. Even though this team already has good locker room guys, he's another good one to add. He's a veteran, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. He fights on every play and he makes 100% effort. So that's a guy you want around, and he can shoot the ball too. And this Lakers team, this is a team that shot the ball they shot one of the worst 3-point balls this season in the NBA. They were towards the bottom of the league in 3-pointers made, as well as percentage. So this is a team that also needs to try to go and grab more 3-point shooters. And that brings me to one of the free agents I think they should try to go get. I think they should try to go get Duncan Robinson from the Miami Heat. He's a free agent. He wants around $20 million a year. The Lakers should have enough money to go get him. If they re-sign Schroeder to $15 million a year and give Wesley like 4 or 5, they should be able to have enough money to go out and get Duncan Robinson. Imagine if they can get Duncan Robinson. That would be pretty good, because you think of how good LeBron is when he can drive to the rim with all that, attention he brings, and then he kicks it out to his shooters. Imagine he has a guy like Duncan Robinson out there to kick it out to. Robinson could average 15, 17 points a game just on like threes pretty much, right? So, I mean, it would be a scary sight if he was added to the Lakers. I think that's a guy the Lakers should target, and I think that's a guy they will target because they know what he can bring to the table, right? So, definitely an interesting guy that the Lakers could go after. He would really help this team shooting, and they would have enough money for him too, in my opinion. So, at that point, you would start him at the shooting guard spot. Maybe you put LeBron or KCP at the 1. Maybe you put KCP at the 1, and then you let LeBron obviously handle the playmaking roles like he normally does. And then you keep LeBron at the 3, AD at the 4, and then going to be interesting to see what they do at the 5, because Montrezl Harrell has a player option, so he can decide what he wants to do with his $9 million a year. I think Harrell will try to go somewhere else because Frank Vogel was not playing him at all in that Phoenix series. And I think Harrell realizes, even though Harrell did play well this season during the regular season and he got meaningful minutes, I think Harrell will realize that when the playoffs come around, it doesn't look like Frank Vogel will play him in a lot of sets because he's not very quick. He kind of slows the pace of the game down for the Lakers, and the Lakers like to move fast. So I think that, Harrell will be a guy that Vogel will not give minutes in the future in the playoffs again. So I think Harrell will take his player option and go somewhere else. So I think they'll lose Harrell, right? Obviously, the Marc Gasol deal, he'll be back next year for $2 million a year, but Marc Gasol might retire. Even if he doesn't retire, the Lakers might cut him or keep him on the contract but not play him, because that whole that whole Marc Gasol thing did not work out like they thought it would. He didn't really play very well for them this season. They thought it would be a better positive for this team that lost Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee last year, and it wasn't. And, it just didn't really work out, but, all is good. It's not really a big deal. I was hoping that Marc Gasol would work out and play well for them, but you can just tell he just doesn't really have it anymore. I think he's ready to retire, and I think he will retire after the season, in my opinion. So I would envision the Lakers not having him on the roster next year, whether he retires or not, because I think they'll cut him if he doesn't. Or even if he is on the roster for some weird reason, they won't play him at all. So, so obviously the Lakers, Anthony Davis is a power forward who can't play center, but he's best at power forward because he can stretch the floor more at the power forward spot. Lakers are probably going to need a center next year. That's another thing they're going to have to look at and go after going into next season, right? And that's weird because I talked about the Duncan Robinson signing that they could possibly make and give him around $20 million a year. But if you do that, you really wouldn't have any money left. Even if you wouldn't have any money left if you re-sign Dennis Schroeder, who I think they'll do. They've talked about they want him back, right? You re-sign Dennis, you sign Duncan Robinson, and now what kind of money do you have left? Even if you let Harrell go after you give Duncan around $20 million a year, you're not going to have anything left, right? And this is a team that's going to need a center, in my opinion, and you're not going to have enough money left to have a center on your, like a valuable center on your team. Maybe if they have a couple million left, maybe they can go for a guy like Cody Zeller in Charlotte. He'll be a free agent. Maybe if they have enough money left, they can go for a guy like Kelly Olynyk to come off the bench, right? But it's just, or maybe Serge Ibaka. They wouldn't even have enough money for that, so that's out of the picture. But it's just a situation now. Maybe you go for Robin Lopez, or if you look at this Lakers roster, and if they do go for Duncan Robinson, which I think they'll go for Duncan Robinson, and I think they'll get him. And this is coming from a Heat fan. I would hate that, but I think that's what will happen. Coming from the Lakers standpoint, if they go get Duncan Robinson, they re-sign Schroeder, which they will do because they're going to need him next year to come off the bench as a sixth man. Otherwise, their bench is going to be really weak. And they re-sign Wesley for like $3 or $4 million a year, which I think they'll do, right? And they re-sign Caruso, who's a free agent, for like $7 or $8 million a year. Then they're going to need to figure out what they want to do with Andre Drummond, who's a free agent, and what kind of money they'll give him. And that will be the most interesting free agent, in my opinion, that the Lakers will have an opportunity on their team to re-sign, because I think Drummond's value is very big. Maybe a year or two ago, his value has decreased a lot the last year or two. And after the way he played in that series against Phoenix, they didn't really play him towards the end because of his size. He was too slow at times, and he can't really play defense. They did not re-sign him. Or sorry, they are looking at him in the re-sign terms, right, at re-signing him. They're not looking at him the same way as they would have looked at him when they first got him. I think when they first got him and they knew he was going to be a free agent, they would have said, okay, because he was playing well the first couple games, they would have said, okay, 12, 15 million a year. Now I think they're looking at him saying maybe 8 a year, maybe 9 a year. That's it. So we'll see what Drummond does in free agency. He's going to have the option to go to other teams, but I don't think Drummond's going to get a big contract from anybody. I don't think he'll get more than like 12 million a year from anybody or 13 million a year. And I think the Lakers will give him that 12 or 13 and he'll end up re-signing. So they'll have a starting center still with Drummond. I mean, we really haven't gotten to see how well he pairs with Anthony Davis and LeBron a lot. We only got to see it in 1 or 2 games in this Lakers Sun series. So we'll get to see how those guys pair together. But Drummond definitely does help this team on the offensive boards. He's just not a great defensive player, and he doesn't have great hands down low, so he drops a lot of easy passes. But I think the Lakers will just re-sign him knowing the fact that they're going to need a center. So if they go re-sign him, they re-sign Schroeder, they sign Duncan Robinson, which I think they'll do. They re-sign Wesley, re-sign Caruso. That will really put them at the max. They won't be able to make any moves or trade. Well, they will be able to trade if they want to, but they won't be able to make any other moves free agency-wise, so they'll be stuck with that team. And that brings up the point that they also have Taylor Horton Tucker as a free agent. You have to figure out what you want to do with him. And I think they'll re-sign him for about $6 million a year. So I take back what I said. They won't have enough room. I'm looking at it now. They'll have enough room just to go out and get Taylor Horton Tucker as well if they sign him for like 6 or 7, based on what I think they'll sign Schroeder for, Duncan for, Wesley for, and Drummond for. I think they'll have enough money they will have enough money to go out and get Taylor Horton Tucker on a $6-7 million a year deal for like a year or two. And then after, I think they should sign him for like a year for $6-7 million. And then give him 1 year and give him more minutes, maybe make him a starter or give him a ton of minutes off the bench and see what he can do, because he's shown a lot of potential, but he hasn't gotten a lot of minutes or a lot of opportunity. So if you give him those minutes and that opportunity, see what he can do with that, and then you can really see his true potential. And then you can say, okay, after this year or after next year, if we sign him for $6 or $7 million, we can give him that $15 to $17 million a year contract because he's worth it. He's proven it. So going to be something that will be interesting to keep an eye on, for the future. Markieff Morris is a free agent. I think they'll let him walk. I don't think they'll re-sign him. Kuzma has still a couple more years left on his deal. He'll be making $13 million a year next year. I think that's a guy that they look to trade if they can. I want to see what they get back for Kuzma, because that'll be interesting. And I know a lot of people have been ragging on Kuzma and making fun of Kuzma. And yes, he didn't play well against Phoenix at all. He averaged 6 points on 30% shooting. Played terrible. But his defense has taken a huge step forward in the last year or two, which is something that he had a lot of criticism on in the beginning of his career. And his defense has taken a huge step forward. And honestly, he's been a pretty good factor for the team off the bench defensively. Not shooting the ball, not scoring the ball, but defensively and rebounding-wise, he's been a pretty good factor for this team. So he's a guy that I think this team will trade, but if they don't get anything that they want back, they'll try to keep him off the bench as an 8th, 9th man and just give him that 15 to 18 minutes a game and just hope he can bring in energy defensively off the bench and bring in some rebounding, which he did this year for them. But obviously the scoring from Kuzma has taken a huge step down. He's a guy who's only going to give you 10 or 11 a game throughout the season, and the postseason probably the same, most likely. Obviously, this was a bad series for him against Phoenix, but I expect him to bounce back and play a little better next year in the playoffs. So if they have him on the roster, I would expect him to come back and play a little better next year. But as I mentioned, I don't think they'll have him on the roster, but he's going to be one of the more interesting guys to keep track of during this offseason, because obviously, we knew what his potential was 2 years ago, and now it doesn't seem like that potential is there anymore, and it doesn't seem like he's very focused. So that's a guy the Lakers may want to move on from, just because of everything that's going on with him and how he hasn't really taken any steps forward in his game. He's taken steps back, and that's something you never want to see. Something you never want to see in a player, in a young player, and that's what they've seen in him. So, I mean, for Kuzma, yeah, it's going to be an interesting offseason for him. I think they'll trade him, and I think if they don't trade him, I think he'll step up and play better for the Lakers next year when the postseason comes around, because I think he knows he'll have to, because let's say the Lakers don't trade him this year, right? I think he'll play better next postseason, because if the Lakers don't trade him this year, and they don't trade him next year, if he has a very bad postseason, they'll trade him no matter what, or they'll cut him, they'll do something. So he's going to need to play really well next year, and especially in the postseason when he's the most valuable, right? Because that's when the Lakers are looking at guys and saying, okay, we need to do the most valuable in the postseason with the team we have now, with LeBron getting to that age and Anthony Davis with the injury, issues he's had. We need guys like Kuzma when the playoffs come around to step up and play big time, average 17, 18 points a game and play defense, right? And if Kuzma can do that, if he's on this roster by next postseason, there's a guy that they would probably keep, right, until his contract's up and then decide what they want to do with him. But, if Kuzma does in fact stay on this roster until next year, if he has another bad postseason like he did this year or next year, they'll definitely either cut him or trade him even for a second rounder at that point, because there's no point in keeping him at that point because you won't get anything back down the line. So you might as well get rid of him as soon as you can. So we'll keep an eye on the Kuzma deal because that's an interesting one. I know Lakers fans want him out, but I think they should just give him a little more patience, in my opinion, and try to maybe give one more year for Kuzma because he's Kuzma's still only 25 years old. He's still pretty young, so just give him one more chance. I think see what he can do. Yeah, this postseason was bad, but see what he can do with one more year of play, and then if I'm the Lakers organization, I would say okay, if he doesn't play good next year, we move on from him. But if he plays well next year, we keep him. So. Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who, you look at it, if a guy like LeBron only has a couple years left, Anthony Davis has a lot of injury issues, he's a guy who can step up and be big for this team down the line in the next 4 or 5 years, in my opinion. Because you see, obviously he's struggled the last 2 years, but a lot of that, in my opinion, has stemmed from the fact that Anthony Davis has kind of taken his role in that team. Kuzma was a starting power forward beforehand, and now Anthony Davis has kind of taken his role on that team when he came into the Lakers, right? And I think it kind of hurt Kuzma's game a little bit because it took away a lot of minutes from Kuzma, took away a lot of attention from Kuzma, and it's just, that's not going to benefit him, right? I mean, if a guy like Anthony Davis left his team and it was LeBron and Kuzma, maybe Kuzma could still go back and average just 17, 18 a game. So, yes, obviously a bad postseason for him. Obviously, he's declined the last 2 years. He should be playing better, even with the addition of Anthony Davis in the last 2 years. But part of that is because of the addition of Anthony Davis. That's part of the reason why his game has declined. But that should not be something that, we blame his whole decline on, but it's definitely part of the reason. And maybe they can try to work in more minutes for him next year or try to do something different for him to try to get him back into his groove that he had his first 2 years of his career. So, another thing to keep an eye out on. Caruso's going to be a free agent too. Let's see what they do with Caruso. He's a guy who I think this team needs to re-sign. He's a great bench player. He can even come in and start a lot of games. He's a great defensive player, right? Very good defensively, very feisty, very energetic, right? He always goes at guys defensively. He talks a little bit too. He gets in people's head. He's a solid three-point shooter. Last year he kind of shot it weak. This year he's really improved on that three-point ball, in my opinion. I've seen a lot of strides that he's taken forward in his three-point shot. A very underrated passer because he's got a lot of speed in transition, right? He's a lot quicker than you think. His first step's quick. So when he gets off on that first step in transition, guys kind of come towards him to try to, prevent him from getting to the rim because he's pretty good down by the rim. And then he can also, kick it to guys like LeBron and Anthony Davis and Caldwell Pope outside. And he's done that a little bit this year. He's worked on his passing a lot, you can tell, in the shortened off season. And he's become a pretty solid passer, a great defender, and a solid three-point shooter who can get to the rim once in a while too and put the ball on the floor. So that's a guy who, in my opinion, should get $8-9 million a year. In my opinion, I think he's worth it. Give him $8-9 million a year for 4 years. He's a guy who should be a long-term guy for this team. You should want to keep on this team for a long time. And he's a very underrated player who doesn't get enough respect from a lot of fans, in my opinion. At first, the hype train was too much. It was a joke, obviously, with the whole Caruso thing, last year and the year before. But now you kind of start to realize when you really watch the game and you really watch him play how good he really is. He's a good player. And he's a guy who this team is going to need back because he's going to bring this team that energy and he's going to bring this team that dog. He's going to bring it every night for this team, and he brings it 24/7. So the Lakers are going to need a guy like this because this is a team that a lot of people called soft after this loss to Phoenix. I don't think this is a soft team in my opinion, but a lot of people call him soft. So you bring in back a guy like Caruso, he's going to help with that. He's going to bring that energy that you need every single night. He's going to be that guy that's not going to be afraid to talk trash. And, if somebody talks trash to LeBron or Anthony Davis, he's not going to be afraid to step in and say something, right? So he's one of those kind of players, and you always need that kind of player on a championship team. And in fact, this Lakers team won the championship last year, right? Obviously, this year we know the first round exit, but this is a team that's still going to look to contend for another year or two at least. So you want to bring back a guy like Caruso because he'll really help this team energy-wise down the line. So an important free agent that I think this team needs to re-sign. And getting into that really quick, because this is the last thing I'm going to mention. I talked about Caruso being there for the Lakers, for a team that still, in my opinion, has a championship window for another year or two. I talked about Caruso being there for them. Now, that's a thing that I think a lot of sports analysts have talked about. Stephen A. Smith mentioned it the other day, right? I'm going to talk about it really quick here. The question I think that I'm going to ask, the viewers that have watched this, and I want you guys to tell me, if you see me in person, DM me your answer or write it in the comments. Has the Lakers championship window closed? If they go and get Duncan Robinson, as I mentioned, right, which they'll have enough money for a guy like that. If they re-sign Schroeder, They re-sign Taylor Horton-Tucker, re-sign Drummond, re-sign Caruso, and re-sign Wesley, and let guys like Markieff Morris walk, and they trade Kuzma. Right? Or if they keep Kuzma, either one. Think about it. Has this team's championship window closed? Because the argument, I'm going to say no, but the argument against me would say even if you go out and get a guy like Duncan Robinson who would really help this team and is very young, right? You still are looking at Anthony Davis and LeBron as the guys that need to play at the highest level for you to win a championship. And can those two guys do that anymore? Is the age catching up to LeBron? Is Anthony Davis too injury prone? Right? Is he too injury prone to the point where he's not going to be reliable for the next couple of years? Right? Are guys like Kuzma, Caruso, Taylor Horton-Tucker, Andre Drummond, are those kind of guys, Schroeder, are those kind of guys not nearly as good as we all thought they were? Right? That's the argument against me. That would be the argument someone will put out against me. And again, before I bring my argument into this case, I want you guys to give me your answer in the comments on YouTube, on Instagram. Just tell me. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you think the Lakers championship window has officially closed or if you think it's still open for another year or two. Because if you don't think it's closed, I think we can all agree that it's only open, like I said, for another year, maybe two, right? It's not going to be open for another 4 or 5 years. Not even 3 years. That's not the case. If it's going to be open, it's going to be open for another year or two. That's it, right? And so I want you guys to write in the comments and tell me what you think, if you think it's open or closed. Now, I'm going to bring up my argument really quick. I think the Lakers championship window is still open for another year or two. Now, I'm going to lean more towards 1 year because I think it's only one more chance that they have. Because I'm going to tell you this, LeBron, I know he's turning 37, I get it. Right? I get all that. But when LeBron loses, right, he tends to always come back with a vengeance. He tends to always come back better than he was before. And he comes back in a way that we've never seen him before. Even at this age that he's going to be going into next season, I still think LeBron will come back with a vengeance. I still think he'll come back pissed off and mad about what happened. And I think he'll come back and you'll see the last year of superstar, top tier, one of the best players in the world, LeBron. I think you'll see one more year of it. And I think Anthony Davis will have a longer offseason to rest. And I think he'll come back, and I think he'll be able to come back better than ever, in my opinion, and play a full season without getting injured, and in the playoffs too. I think a guy like Kuzma, if they don't trade him, will step up next year because I think he knows he'll have to next year or else his time will be done. And not just with the Lakers, his time could be done in the league. And I think Kuzma will know he has to step up. I think guys like Caruso will play a bigger role next year and step up. If they go get Duncan Robinson, he'll be huge. If they can re-sign Drummond, and Drummond can kind of work this offseason and get a gist of what the Lakers organization is all about and get a feel about this organization, get a feel about this team's chemistry, Drummond will play like he did in Detroit next year. This is me saying I think all these factors will happen next year. Now, if one or two of these factors doesn't happen, especially LeBron and Anthony Davis, this team is obviously done championship window-wise. But I think these factors will happen. That's why I think the Lakers still have 1 or 2 more years as a championship window. Like I said, I'm going to lean more towards 1, so I'll stick with 1. I don't think they'll necessarily win the championship next year, but I think they'll be able to compete for it and at least do something in the Western Conference next year. And if they get to the finals, maybe do something. But after that, probably not much. But I think I'll give them 1 more year because I'm not going to doubt LeBron quite yet, right? As much as a lot of people are doubting him, I'm not going to quite give up on LeBron or doubt him quite yet because, yes, I think age is catching up to him slowly, but I still think he can give us 1 more dominant year in the league. And I think when he plays at that dominant level, the Lakers or whatever team LeBron's on will always have a chance. So I think they have 1 more year left in their championship window. You guys let me know what you think. Talk in the comments. If you see me in person, talk to me, right? Let me know. Give me an idea because I really want to know because it's an interesting question. And I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast about the Los Angeles Lakers. I have a football podcast coming out tomorrow, so make sure you check that out. And I hope everyone has a good day.